So, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the 12th webinar of Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific, focusing on the topic of evaluation for policy making. I'm Nazir, your host for today's webinar, and working as a coordinator with Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific, which is a community of energy and evaluation professionals across the Asia Pacific region. Before we dive into the discussion, we would like to get to know a little more about you. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, sharing your name, country, and the organization. And also, it would be great if you could respond to a small fun question we have in the last box here. That is, if you had to choose one fictional character to be your partner in conducting evaluation, who would it be and why? So we are expecting some creative responses in the chat. And I would like to start with sharing mine. It's an age of artificial intelligence, and I'm sure you might have seen the movie Her. So I would like to choose Samantha from the movie Her as my evaluation partner, because I feel Samantha's advanced artificial intelligence, as well as her understanding of human emotions and as well as interactions, could help me in doing my evaluation work in a better way that would not only bring the technological advancement to the work, but as well as, solve the problem of machines and artificial intelligence, better understanding human emotions. We all would like to see your responses in the chat. Meanwhile, I would like to share some of the session guidelines or ground rules for this webinar. First of all, as I already shared, this session is being recorded, and we assume that by attending and participating, you give your consent for this to happen. But if you have any concern, feel free to reach out to me. We would like to request you to keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking, but you can switch on your cameras for better engagement, considering your internet connectivity. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. The speakers will respond directly in the chat, but there's also a dedicated session at the end for discussion and as well as for question and answer. We'll be sharing with you a feedback form at the end, so we'll be really happy to get your feedback and suggestions. We will also be sharing this recording of the session on YouTube and as well as on our website. Additionally, we also document the key discussion points as well as summary of the discussions that will be shared with all the registrants, but as well as uploaded on our website. The agenda of today's webinars look like this. We will start with welcome remarks and context setting by Edward Wine, who is the member of the steering committee of Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. Then we will have presentations from our three keynote speakers covering almost 45 minutes. That will be followed by a moderated audience questions and discussion session. And then we will wrap up the session at around 10:15 a.m. So let me invite Edward Wine for welcome remarks as well as setting the context for today's webinar. Ed, over to you.
Thank you. I still have that issue with 2 blocks of gray. Does anybody else have that, or is it just my? I see nodding. For some reason, Nazir.
So I will stop sharing mine so that.
Okay, I'll share mine.
Yep.
Maybe you can figure out what's going on, but.
Right.
Okay. So can you see my screen? Okay, good.
Yes.
So I just wanted to give some introductory comments about Energy Evaluation Asia Pacific. We are a not-for-profit established in 2018, so it's been 6 years now. And we are modeled after the evaluation organization in the US called IEEPC, the International Energy Program Evaluation Conference. We've been having conferences every 2 years in the US since 1983. And then we went over to Europe and we, excuse me, there's another organization now called Energy Evaluation Europe, but used to be called IEPPEC for Program and Policy. And that's been going on since 2010. And in the EEAP, we try to support the evaluation of energy policy and programs in Asia Pacific from Pakistan to New Zealand. We have about 30 countries. And when we talk about energy, we do include both energy efficiency and renewable energy. And our mission is to take a leadership role in expanding the practice of and capacity for what we call objective evaluation. We know there's subjective elements, but rigorous evaluation based on empirical data of energy efficiency, renewable energy programs and policies. We bring together people interested in energy evaluation across the region. We do that by fostering a network of both practitioners and stakeholders, and you'll hear more about stakeholders today. And we try to compare or provide and sharing our database of resources on international best practices in energy evaluation. Of course, it's a lot when we say international based on what's happening in Europe as well as in the US and North America. We primarily hold webinars sharing the developments and skills of particular aspects of energy evaluation. And then we hold events such as a conference, not so regular. We haven't had one in a few years. COVID did affect us, and we hope to have one next year, and we'll see how that develops. And you can learn more about us at the website listed at the bottom of the slide. Today's webinar is a topic I have been interested in my whole career in evaluation, which is over 40 years, looking at the linkage and interplay between evaluators and policymakers. And we know we can do good evaluations, at least the good evaluators know they can do that, but they need to make sure that the results of those evaluations are useful and used by policymakers. In the old days, we do an evaluation and then we put it in our filing cabinet and say, well, we're done. And now for some people, they complete their evaluation, put it in the cloud, and they say they're done. But we know that's really just the start of the whole process. And there are different ways of presenting the results of the evaluation, either on paper, electronically, or face-to-face in terms of meetings or webinars. And there are other approaches, but we need to make sure that policymakers understand what we've done, and evaluators need to understand policymakers and the policy cycle, in particular how policies are designed and implemented, so that the evaluation can be integrated during the design and implementation stages, not just waiting till everything's done. So we want to increase the effectiveness of policies. So we have three distinguished speakers who will present based on their experience, what they've learned and lessons learned, as well as advice for going forward for evaluators and policymakers. And I have people from North America, from Europe, and from the world. Juha represents the world to me, from the Global Environment Facility, where he's former director there, the evaluation office. But we'll start with Jared, and he will introduce himself, but he's a consultant who's had many years of practice and is working with DNV, one of the primary consultants on evaluation in North America. So I'll hand it over and he'll have about 15 minutes or so. I'll try to keep track and interrupt him where needed. Jared, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There.
I appreciate that.
And
thank you,
Ed.
Ed.
Over to you. So you should be able to share your screen.
Let's do this. All right. So yeah, thanks very much. Jared Metoyer here. Been with DNV now 20 years this summer. Have been doing evaluation that whole time, all the way from field engineering, project management, and now sort of leading several different teams that do evaluations from coast to coast in the US. So fittingly, my colleagues and I have been engaged in these two states, California, Massachusetts, for quite some time. So really, the way I wanted to frame this was first to talk about the policy itself that kind of spurred a lot of the activity. And then a key element of this is that, energy efficiency programs and now even broader decarbonization, electrification, and other types of programs are really how the policy gets implemented. And so when we talk about evaluations of programs, those then lead directly into evaluating how is the policy being implemented in that sort of programmatic framework. And so you'll see as we go through, we'll talk a little bit about each of these elements, but also try to, as the title suggests, really focus on some lessons learned, and really some of the lessons learned trying to be across these two very different states, different climates, different customer and industrial bases, but quite a lot of similarities in terms of lessons we've learned over these many years in evaluation. So this is a lot of text, but just to give just some context, there's also going to be a lot of links throughout. So there's a lot of resources linked within this. But really, this is more to focus on the dates more so than all the text. So what I wanted to highlight on the California side really goes back into the late 90s is really when the funding mechanism policies became into code, and then those all required rigorous evaluation of energy efficiency programs. So 1996 to fund, based on electric consumption, and then 1999 on gas consumption. And really these created and established funding mechanisms to fund the programs themselves, the market interventions that would increase energy efficiency. Both California and Massachusetts had a long history of building energy codes, driving energy efficiency, and you'll see that a little bit later. But really, when we started to get into heavy programmatic activity, as well as evaluation of that programmatic activity, it really started, just over 25 years ago in both cases. You can also see as you go towards the bottom of each of these are sort of how has the policy evolved. So AB 32 in 2006 is a good for example that required California's reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. We're now past 2020, so that's been updated to with the likes of SB 100 and AB 1279. So these more recent policies are to get to 100% clean electricity by 2045. And then most recently, kind of the Climate Emergency Act, which is the AB 1279, really requires 85% emission reduction. And that's across everything, not just clean electricity, but looking at industrial, direct use of gas for heating and other processes. And then on the Massachusetts sides, really one of the critical kind of watershed moments is the establishment of the Efficiency Advisory Council. That then created the administration of programs and 3-year cycles and plans. And you'll see this kind of play out in my next slide as we show why have these states kind of consistently been the leaders, both from an energy efficiency policy perspective, but also in terms of conducting some of the most innovative, rigorous, and timely evaluations. And then Massachusetts, similarly in 2021, created kind of this next generation roadmap and climate policy to get even more aggressive on greenhouse gas emissions. So not only are we looking to avoid building new power plants, it's really a focus across sectors at greenhouse gas emissions. So these are really the policy drivers. So then when we talk about how this gets implemented, again, at a high level, this is the ACEEE's definition in terms of what are customer energy efficiency programs. There's a wide range of them. They really affect residential and commercial buildings, industry, and agriculture. So all of the end uses of energy, and both electricity, gas, and other fuels. You can see then in the 5 bullets, it's including but not limited to, these are the types of programs or types of market interventions that are common both in these 2 states that I'm going to highlight, but also across the rest of the country. So direct monetary incentives for efficient technology, typically in a retrofit or replacement on burnout situation. Other interventions that reduce retail costs. So this tends to happen with upstream or midstream interventions that focus on the manufacturing to reduce the initial cost, or even in the distribution or retail sales. You can also see that while there was this early history kind of from the oil and gas crisis in the 70s that stemmed into energy codes, enhancing those energy codes, and then code enforcement also started to be funded and innovated on through public benefits and customer programs. And then underlying a lot of these things is training, education, and outreach, both to those practitioners that need to implement and effectively deploy the technologies or create these programs, but also on the evaluation side, as well as the customers themselves. Someone has to make a decision to make something more efficient. So there's quite a bit of training, education, and outreach that underpins kind of all the above. All these activities require that. And then research and technology development has been ongoing, and there's quite a bit of that is funded through these same policies that created the funding mechanisms in the first place, that take a little bit based on the actual usage of end users, residential, commercial, or industrial, and then puts that back into these programs for efficiency, and that also funds the evaluations themselves. So the map, just for context, Massachusetts, one of the original colonies, one of the first states. Over here, smaller population, but consistently a leader when it comes to energy efficiency across the board. More and more that definition expands to things like vehicle and building electrification, as well as pure energy efficiency. Then, of course, we have California, the economically the size and maybe larger than certain countries, huge geographic area, geographic variation. So quite a bit going on, and also a consistent leader. You can also see that, within this map, the darker the shade, the higher the rankings. This was the most recent, the 2022 scorecard. There should be a new one coming out soon. But you can see here, and then what I wanted to highlight here really quickly and then get into the evaluations was program cycles and budget cycles tend to be on the 3-year variety. So you can see these are the rankings themselves, but you can see this correlation of, Massachusetts and California have either been number 1 or number 2, and it's also roughly correlated to these different cycles. So in a given funding or budget cycle, there's maybe more spending, more activity, and more energy savings achieved. And then you can see that, effectively, both of these states have been leaders for quite some time. And again, it all goes back to the establishment of those original codes and policies that created the funding mechanisms. There's been rigorous evaluation throughout. So when I start showing resources, there are research reports that go all the way back to these 2007 timeframes, as well as very recent reports. While these rankings are just out, there are hot off the press evaluation results from earlier this year, and more being published as we go. So strong evaluation frameworks are critical to all of this. This is sort of common across. So both states really built upon these national and regional methods to prove out and continuously measure progress. Originally, it was to really just justify any spending, was to prove that there were clear savings, that there were public benefits, and that the programs are cost effective, and more cost effective than other alternatives. So IPMVP, it's been around the longest and underpins everything in terms of the actual measurement and verification of energy programs. And again, it's sort of stood the test of the time that it works really well for energy efficiency. It also works really well for electrification and other contexts. So if there is energy being consumed, IPMVP can be applied. In the early 2000s, we had the California Evaluation Framework, 2004, and then the protocols followed shortly after in 2006. And this really gives, many pages of very clear, systematized approaches and methodologies that can be applied. The framework is a very practical guide that gets into statistics, measurement approaches, and references back to IPMVP. The evaluation protocols is more thinking about it in a programmatic sense. So you need to apply different methods if you're looking for the direct savings of a technology retrofit program, but you actually need quite a different approach if you're looking at things like a program administrator's influence on codes and standards advocacy. So it really is a more programmatic framework that then the protocols are the programmatic kind of lens, but then often references back to the framework for very specific tactics that you can implement in your evaluations. Over on the right, quite a few more. The NEEP Regional National EMV portal links to quite a few resources, including the ISO New England methodologies, which were central to a lot of what underpins the Massachusetts evaluations. There's a combination there of both looking at how does evaluation helped to prove out and show the value of energy efficiency and other interventions in the long-term resource planning. So thinking about avoiding a power plant and that long-term planning, but also does feed into the forward capacity market. So the ongoing balancing of supply and demand at the system operator level. So those are quite important. And then you can see at the national level, the C-Action, as well as Uniform Methods projects, lots of very detailed, specific methods to measure specific types of either measures or programs, all sponsored by the Department of Energy, National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, played a heavy hand in helping to get a lot of those over the fence. And then there's another US EPA resources that also gets into not only evaluation of energy impacts, but also air quality and emissions impacts, which are even more critical today. So now zooming in, California evaluations, again, per capita energy use has been relatively flat, while the rest of the country has grown by about 33% since the 70s. These two links really open up into portals that include lots of information, lots of reports. The first one is everything ongoing. You can see the latest draft reports. There's a public comment process on those evaluations. And then the latter, CalMac, is the library of every research report and about that's been done over many, many years. These are really, really important and great resources to build on. So all those in the audience looking to evaluate something new, there should be a methodology per the previous slide, and there's probably been an evaluation of it linked in these resources. Very similarly for Massachusetts, again, a long history dating back to energy codes in the 70s through the 80s and into the early 90s, but then a much bigger investment into the billions of US dollars in energy efficiency programs administered through the utilities themselves as program administrators. And then you can see here the Massachusetts EEAC has a couple of really important resources. The first really gives you what are the savings of the programs and ongoing reporting about the programs themselves. The second is all about the EM&V. So there's huge collections of EM&V studies that have been conducted. But I'm going to try to get us to the lessons learned, kind of the meat of it before my time's up. So I've tried to emphasize this a few different times, but the rigorous evaluations of large impact and also the largest budget programs. So kind of the 80-20 rule, where often 80% of the savings might come from 20% of the programs or interventions or measures. So really focusing on where's the most savings always gets you the biggest bang for the buck from an evaluation perspective. These really have ensured that there have been economic and emissions impacts. So you don't get sort of per capita energy use not growing like the rest of the country without these both investments in the programs themselves, but also investing in evaluation. So without that investment in evaluation, you don't get continuous improvement. You don't find sort of the, while it's not all that often, there are programs that just don't work. They need to be pivoted from and either redesigned or a reallocation of resources towards what is working. But then that all kind of goes into data. The data is king. So well-tracked market interventions, meaning there's ongoing data being collected as you're doing the program throughout the year, throughout the 3-year cycle, are really critical, as well as collecting data in evaluation context. So going into the field, reviewing engineering data, collecting data for meters and sensors, all those are critical to the continuous improvement cycle. A large part of most evaluations really is in the gathering and cleaning of data. Whether it goes back to, when there's, mostly handwritten billing reads all the way to automated meter data, those things have really led towards, what we see now in terms of providing the data. And then really kind of this third box is, qualitative contextual data is always important. While we have gotten better, much better data in terms of energy consumption from smart meters, there's also real-time sensors and devices themselves that provide telemetry and data and advanced analytics and machine learning and AI, all of the above. The qualitative contextual data is still really important to understand why. The question right after you say, well, how much did we save, is, well, why didn't we save more? Or why did we save so much more than expected? So really qualitative data is really key. So then a couple more slides to wrap up here. One of the things is behavioral programs. So non-technology specific, but really either through information. Some are basically designed as more competitive. So you're currently using more or using less than your peers, and looking and providing behavioral interventions that aren't new technologies. These really can be evaluated through true experimental designs. They have large-scale and proven savings. Many have been evaluated in both of these states and beyond. And that is in addition to some of the more traditional programs. Second bullet, large custom engineering retrofit projects and evaluation are becoming more and more critical. So there have been lots of market transformations that have happened over this period. We went from incandescents to CFLs to LED lighting, appliances, whether it's refrigerators type appliances or commercial food cooking appliances, or even improvements in the actual processes and industrial facilities and high-tech facilities. There's been quite a bit that have happened to transform those markets through energy codes, as well as building energy codes themselves. So what we see are some of these larger customized engineering retrofits becoming bigger and bigger parts of program portfolios. Those require engineering and the evaluation itself to understand the interconnections between the interventions and how the energy is used before and after the interventions. There's an increasing focus on levels of detail, so who benefits and who doesn't. So distribution of impacts, especially thinking about disadvantaged communities, thinking about lower income tiers versus higher income tiers, and who's actually participating in the program, and then from an evaluation lens, who's benefiting. Determining emissions impacts, the focus used to always be on energy savings. In California, the goals themselves have now shifted toward total system benefit, which is a combination of greenhouse gas emission reduction as well as grid benefits, in addition to the primary energy savings and capacity benefits. There's always an increasing focus on what are the recommendations for improvement. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the contextual data becomes more and more important because it's not just good enough to have the answer and, as Ed alluded to, file it away. It's what's the answer, what can we do to improve this so that we can then feed that back into the next program cycle, but then it also goes into that bigger picture policy framework in terms of how are we going to change the roadmap or change the bigger policy for one of these states based on years and years of program intervention and evaluation. And then upstream, midstream, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, these models. Yep.
Garrett, you need to go a little quicker.
Yeah, I got one more slide.
Running out of time. Okay.
And then some impacts are incrementally too small. So some things you can measure in the laboratory that are really hard to measure in the field. And sometimes they don't persist long enough. So you can have very short run impacts that by the time you get to evaluation, they've already gone back to their steady state. Just to wrap it up, there are some latest trends to further embed evaluation. So looking at quarterly or mid-year results as opposed to waiting to the end of the program so things are more timely. This is also crucial for long-term interventions. Then over on the right side, process evaluation in both of these states had been decoupled from impacts, but more and more the goal is to do these in conjunction so that you get that contextual information and you can evolve the program design as you go, but also gain more insights that are going to feed back into future policy. So with that, there are some other DNV reports. This latest one is the framework for the future, looking at various energy policies around the world and how that's affecting the energy transition. And then next week, we're launching our 8th energy transition outlook that looks out to the next 25 years globally. And that's it.
That's great. Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but it would take the rest of the webinar. So I think we have allocated time at the end, and we'll return to you and with other questions. So
yeah,
I
Black
think
Panther is my answer for the fictional character. Lots of great technology. I think I could use lots of that tech to do evaluations.
Okay. Sounds good. I think we'll then go to Jean-Sébastien. And again, without further ado, you can start sharing your slides.
Can you hear me and see the slide correctly?
Looks very good.
So thanks a lot, Ed, for inviting me to this webinar and to maybe well, to introduce briefly myself. So I'm Jean-Sébastien working at IEECP, which stands for Institute for European and Energy and Climate Policy, and I'm also a board member of Energy Evaluation Europe that Ed mentioned earlier, and that he kindly spurred or supported the creation in 2010 and in the first years. So I'm very happy to join you today and to answer Nazir about the questions of the partner for the evaluation. I would probably choose Master Yoda because that's always good to have someone wise on your side who knows the full history of the policy or the program that you evaluate, and that who can help you to stand back when needed. So I will switch to Europe. So I cross the Atlantic Ocean, where we have a bit of different approach and culture, both for the way to implement energy efficiency and then to evaluate that. So I don't have I did not plan slides to give you an overview of the policy framework in Europe, etc. But let's say that nowadays the main targets are set at the level of the European Union, so the group of the member states, and then you have directives to setting different provisions to achieve this target, and there is this subsidiarity principle, which means that every member state has some margin in the way they implement the directive, as long as they reach the targets. So it's a combination of common commitments and flexibility in implementations. And the national governments are let's say, the key players, with the national policies in most countries being the big part of the implementation. Even if in half of the countries you have what is called in Europe energy efficiency obligation schemes, that are a bit similar to what you have in California and Massachusetts, where you have obligation on utilities to implement programs to achieve savings. But there is not this a loop with the Public Utility Commission. We have energy regulatory authority, but they are not in charge of evaluating every programs, etc. So it's a bit different in that way. So that's for the background and the outline of the presentation. Most of the presentation will be based on some work done in the EPATE European project that I will introduce in a second. Then I will briefly give some update about a more recent project that is named Move Plus, and that for some part takes over what has been done in EPATE. And I will finish with further thoughts and also some news about the next Energy Evaluation Europe conference that will be next year in Berlin. So the EPATE project was done completed 5 years ago now. It was done in 2017 to 2019. It was part of a European program named Horizon 2020. And its main objective was to support the improvement of ex-post impact evaluations for energy efficiency policies, because that's a practice that is much less systematic compared to the evaluation of energy efficiency programs in the US. As we worked on evaluation, we had also a project theory to explain what we wanted to achieve, and with the assumption that the improved evaluation practices would increase the effectiveness of policies and ultimately support the achievement of more energy savings and reductions in greenhouse gases emissions. The main output of the projects includes a knowledge base that is an online database of evaluations that you can filter through different criteria. It's still available if you the website is still working, that you can see on this slide. But we could not yet update this knowledge base, so now it's a bit outdated, let's say. We also did case studies on a selection of ex-post evaluations, and we had an online toolbox that could provide guidance per type for the evaluation according to type of policies and type of sectors where these policies are implemented. And the interesting point about evaluation and policy making can be found, for example, in the case studies where we did, on top of summarizing why the evaluation was done, what were the main methods used and the main findings. We also did interviews with either the main evaluator or the evaluation customer to understand better the context of the evaluation and what they learned, not only about the evaluation results, but also from the evaluation process. So there were some questions related to how the evaluation was used, etc. And more specifically about the topic of today of evaluation and policy making, one task of the EPATE project was focused on the issue of integrating evaluation into the policy cycle, and that the result from this task was presented at the Energy Evaluation Europe conference in 2021. And that's, I think, the main reason why Ed invited me to present today. So you will find the references in the slides, and this work was not, let's say, a starting point for thinking about this. That's a topic that I've looked at for some years, and I had the chance to take part in the IEECP conference in the US in 2007 in Chicago, and that's the first time I met Ed for already a session about evaluation use. And I think the paper that were presented there are still very relevant. So why did we look in this project at the link between evaluation and policy cycle? It's because, of course, the main part of the project was to develop, let's say, to support capacity building on implementing evaluation, doing evaluations, developing better methods, and so on. But what we saw, and especially in the interviews done in the case studies and also in the survey and exchanges we had with the stakeholders, is that it's nice to have good methods and to provide robust results, etc. But it does not necessarily translate into the evaluation of this, into the use, of these results. And maybe sometimes you provide very good results, but they did not really answer the questions that the policymakers had. So that's one point. And the second point is that we also saw that there was a bad trend in evaluation to be raised or decided only at the end of the policy cycle. So when you are close to the end of the implementation or starting to prepare the revision for the next period of the policy, or maybe in need to decide whether the policy needs to be continued or stopped. While it's very important, and that's one of the lessons learned from all this work, that you start the discussion between evaluators and policymakers from the very beginning of the policy cycle. So when the evaluation, when the policy is designed. You can see here. So we made 2 surveys in the project, one in the beginning, one in the end, and we asked the stakeholders what they think about the use of evaluation, whether evaluation was useful for them, for their work, how it should be implemented, etc. And you see here 3 examples of quotes from this survey. And let's say what I take from that is the message that that should not be what we see sometimes, what I just mentioned, that evaluation comes only at the end. For many reasons, you have on the bottom maybe the evaluator point of view, that the policy should be designed in an evaluation-friendly way. So obviously that's a viewpoint from an evaluator, but it means that if there is no exchange from the start of the policy and you ask an evaluator too late, maybe he cannot really provide you something meaningful, because that's too difficult to reconstruct the policy theory, to find the data and so on. So that's just one example, and you have on the top statements that are more from the side of the policymakers. Let's say that overall, the idea behind looking at this topic is we acknowledge that the relation between the evaluation and the policy making or the policy cycle is that it should be a two-way integration, because each side can benefit from the others and each side needs to provide inputs to the others so that it works well. So that's not only sometimes maybe the blue arrow is missing. So that's more the evaluation that has to provide something to the policy in terms of findings, results, etc. But for the evaluation to be in line with the need of the policymaker, there should be also some inputs from the other side. And what we did is that we tried to go more into details into these interactions. Here you have a simplified view of it. In the report, we even looked at each stage of the policy cycle and possible interactions with the evaluation process more in details, but then that's something that you cannot read with a single figure. So we opted, when presenting the overview, for some kind of simplification of the policy cycle and the evaluation process. And let's say the main thing that you see is that you can find interaction at basically every stages. That might be also different way of implementing evaluation, from ex-ante evaluation to ex-post evaluation. Jared mentioned also the trend to have some evaluation along the way, not to wait until the end of the program or the policy to get some results, so that action can be taken early enough when let's say, some bad trends are identified. So in essence, from what I showed earlier, you may wonder why it's not natural to have these interactions and this, let's say, integration of evaluation into the policy cycle. And what we found when discussing with the stakeholders, asking them again some questions, is that there can be many barriers for that. We classify them in different categories that you can see here, and you have just a few examples of the barriers that are identified. And let's say from the evaluator or the evaluation community side, we always hear about the budget thing, the fact that not enough budget is dedicated to evaluation, that maybe also not enough time is for that, so that is very very well known. But you have also other issues, very practical issues, like the turnover in the policymakers. I'm quite sure that most of you already encountered this difficulty that you start an evaluation, and before even maybe 2 or 3 months after, the people you have in front of you have changed, the persons in charge of the policy, or let's say in charge of managing the evaluation change. That's more frequent than we may think. So that creates, let's say, a difficulty in the continuity in the exchanges between the evaluators and the customer of the evaluation or the policymakers, which may also create some issue at the end, because the expectations of the person who took over may not be the same as the person that were initiated the evaluation. And the last part on the bottom for me is also very important, the issue of communication and mutual understanding. That might be, sometimes the evaluators come from the implementing side, but that's not always the case, and vice versa. Sometimes the person designing or implementing the policy may not have an evaluation experience, and they may at the end speak very different language and use the same words but not with the same meaning, or use words that the users do not really understand, which may create some misunderstanding and some also fear against the user. I don't know if fear is the right word, but I guess you get my point. So what we did in this task and in the report is that we tried to look at first from the case studies we analyzed, but also from the literature and other sources, try to find some good practices to overcome these barriers, or to let's say to create the better conditions for integration between evaluation and policy making. And well, I will not read the slide, but maybe just highlight. You see that the first point, and yes, nothing new for evaluators, but the taking time to clarify the expectation, to clarify the evaluation's objectives is really really essential. Sometimes there is an implicit agreement on the specifications and then the proposal made by the evaluator, but without really discussing, and each side may have their own understanding of what the other side expects. And you have then only maybe an interim meeting and the meeting at the end of the evaluation. And this may result in some, let's say, disappointment from the side of the policymaker, and also from the side of the evaluator who sees that their results are not used because they are not really in line with what the policymaker were expecting. So from that we derived. Yes, I have to speed up.
You have a few minutes left.
Right. So I'm almost done with the main part, and then I would be very quick with the rest. So just to say that from that we look at possible actions, plan of actions that can be done on both sides, from the side of evaluators, but also from the side of the policy officers who manage who are let's say the customer of the evaluation. And this means many things, like identifying the relevant contacts that that should be, for example, in the steering committee of the evaluation, or that should be available to answer the questions from the evaluators. Ensuring regular contacts so that's just for the category communication and mutual understanding. there are actions for the other categories. But are having regular meetings also between the customer and the evaluators, and not only at the beginning and the end. That's unfortunately a practice that we see still too often, even if we know that it's not good. Now I switch to a project that is currently ongoing and that I have the pleasure to coordinate. That's still a European project, but funded by another program who actually took over from Horizon 2020, the LIFE program. And here that's focused on one particular article of the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is the key piece umbrella directive, let's say, for energy efficiency policy in Europe. And this Article 8, that's what is the closest from what you have in the US. But instead of the requiring utilities to achieve savings, that requires member states to achieve savings, and the member state have the possibility to put in place this obligation scheme I mentioned earlier, when they can put they can kind of transfer either the total or part of their energy savings obligation to energy suppliers or distributors. And the objective for Fence Move Plus is to provide a technical support to the stakeholders, so both the policy officers, but also the market players in implementing this article, and especially through experience sharing. And here we consider the whole life cycle. So I think that's maybe a way to continue the work done in EPATE, but in that case we don't work only on policy evaluation. We look at both at the main stages, let's say policy design, implementation, monitoring, and verification, and so on. We have not developed yet a lot of resources on policy evaluation, but it will come soon. And one thing we want to do, for example, would be to complement the knowledge base that has been done earlier. So if you're interested, just contact me. You can send me suggestions of recent evaluations we should add in this knowledge base. And if we look at what the stakeholders are interested in, we made a survey to look at their top priority, and not only on evaluation, that was about the whole implementation of the article. And interestingly, the top one answer was the evaluation of actual impacts. And I may come back to that in the questions if you want to know why. And another topic that has a growing interest in Europe, I mean, for some years, maybe for 10 years already, but it's really going to implementation now. That's the evaluation of multiple impact. And there is another project on that named SeedMicat, where they have developed a tool from a previous project. And that's also something to look at if you are interested. Quick thoughts, if I have the time, Ed, or maybe otherwise I keep that for the questions. You tell me. Thinking about who would support the link between evaluation and policy making, I would say parliaments have a key role to play, at least in Europe, because they may request evaluation, and above all, they can discuss in public debates the results of the evaluation and question what the government is doing. Court of auditors, they are also taking a more and more important role. In practice, they do not really evaluation, they do what they call reviews, but their reviews are mostly based on what is available. So if no evaluation has been done, their work is much more limited. So there is a strong link with the evaluation. And their recommendations for sure have much more visibility and impact in the media and in the public debate than usual evaluations, I would say. And maybe I stop here just saying that there will be an evaluation conference in Europe next year, and stay tuned. We will open the call for abstract in a few weeks, probably mid-October. Sorry, Ed, that was too long.
No, that was great. Yeah, I have lots of questions, which I'll hold to the end, but very informative in the conference. Hopefully I might be able to attend that one, and we can continue our discussion about evaluation in policymakers and policy action. But without further ado, I think we'll hand it over to Juha, and he'll provide a global perspective on what he's experienced over the years in his role at the GEF. So Juha, we see your slide.
Thanks very much. I hope you can see my screen. So first to the important question about who would I choose as my evaluation partner. And I think that, I think Yoda is a good choice, but I might go for Han Solo, or even better, Indiana Jones. And the reason being the fact that, I first of all, I think that the field work is important. It's important that you go to places and you see what's happening and you analyze what's on the ground. The other thing is that sometimes, we evaluators, when we do that, we are not very popular. So it's actually very good to have some protection there. But most importantly, so Harrison Ford in real life is a real life environmentalist who is very committed to the issue and has actually done some pro bono work for the Global Environment Facility, where I worked until March this year. Since then, I've joined the Environmental Law Institute here in Washington, D.C. as a visiting scholar, and I'm also doing some advisory work here, but I'm going to draw on the GEF work. I just wanted to put out a couple of quotes here. This is from Carol Weiss, who was, as you may know, was a very influential evaluation thinker a few decades ago. And she emphasized very much this issue of that we have to be able also to ensure the utilization of evaluations and to communicate the findings. Now, in my area, so the United Nations has an evaluation group that brings together more than 50 evaluation units from the UN, and they have their norms and standards. And one of the important things there is also this intention of use of evaluations and how evaluations can contribute to learning and informed decision making. And also, very importantly, not just in the area where we have evaluated, but generating knowledge beyond for use by others, and by empowering the stakeholders that are actually working in the space of making programs and projects for the improvement of the place where we live. So just a couple of words on the Global Environment Facility, if you don't happen to know it. It is the oldest and most established of these public funding mechanisms in the international sphere. It was established in connection with in anticipation, I should say, of the Earth Summit in 1992 that was held in Rio de Janeiro, and that started this whole process with these international environmental agreements, including the UN Climate Change Convention and the Biodiversity Convention. And the GEF is an official financial mechanism for these conventions, the 5 that are on the screen. And it's financing projects in developing countries basically to the tune of about $1 billion a year, and mobilizing maybe 6 times that amount from external sources. So for this reason, that it's fairly significant, and it's supposed to be very innovative. So the GEF has taken the evaluation function extremely seriously, and I've worked in other organizations, and I know quite well places such as the UN Development Program, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the World Bank. And I have to say that the GEF has the most credible evaluation function, and it's not because I was heading it for the past 10 years, but it is because it was set out in that system. You have the Governing Council, which is the member states, basically, which receives all of the evaluations conducted by the Independent Evaluation Office. And the Independent Evaluation Office is independent in the sense that it reports to the donors and to the recipient countries in the Council that also set the evaluation agenda and decide on the follow-up action. So it's not to the management at all. These agencies that are referred to here are the 18 agencies that have direct access to GEF funding to implement the projects that the fund funds. And they range from UN agencies to the World Bank to regional development banks like Asian Development Bank and some regional and national agencies. So we have an evaluation pyramid, if you wish, which starts from the monitoring data at the bottom and projects and the agencies and others are collecting this data. And where I was working, I still use the present tense, but it should be past tense by now. The Independent Evaluation Office, what our role was and continues to be, was to look into the higher level evaluations, to look at the more programmatic and thematic aspects of the GEF performance. And it culminated every 4 years into a comprehensive evaluation that would bring together findings and lessons and so on from all of the other evaluations that we had conducted. So perhaps approximately 30 evaluations over 4 years that would then be brought together to this comprehensive evaluation that would inform the next financial replenishment cycle of the fund. So I'm going to take two brief examples of these component evaluations that both of them contributed to the comprehensive evaluation, and which I should say is a fundamental document for the replenishment process, where in the GEF system, it's really impressive that the replenishment participants and the governing council, before they start discussing the directions for the next 4-year funding period, they consider evaluation, usually for at least half a day in a meeting, and go deep into what evaluations told them. So the first evaluation that I wanted to mention is not actually a traditional evaluation at all. We looked into transformational change. So even if the GEF is putting $1 billion and perhaps with the co-financing something like a $6 billion a year into the environmental programs, it is still a drop in the ocean. So it's very important to have leverage points for these programs that lead to something larger than just the project outcomes and outputs. So we asked the 18 agencies to identify projects that they thought had a transformational impact. And these had to be completed projects which had project-level terminal evaluations. And we looked into this. We got a large set of proposals from the agencies, and we reviewed them in light of the verified results, and selected only a handful for deeper analysis of what would be sort of like the common factors that make these projects truly transformational. And we looked into these dimensions that are on these slides, whether they are really relevant to the global environmental issues, what is their level and focus on ambition, what are the outcomes, and are they sustainable? So one of the projects that we selected for this in-depth analysis, which we had been able to verify, was actually very successful. And it was the Uruguay wind energy program, which started in around the late 2000 2000s. And it was a project that was heavily country driven, and the idea really came from the country itself, which is a small country which has a lot of hydroelectricity, but they had actually at that point of time exhausted all of the hydropower potential, and they were facing energy shortages. So there was a demand for something new, and they wanted to avoid the trap of going straight into, you know, fossil fuels and so on, and leapfrog. So wind energy was identified as a key factor here, a key potential area. And there was the government was very keen on it, developed policies to support it and tariffs to support it. Private sector was keen on jumping on into this. And lo and behold, in about 8 years, wind energy really took off in July, from starting from 0% to about a third of all energy production in the country. And from the transformational point of view, if that's not enough, so we really looked into it, that it was really relevant for the issues that we wanted to deal with, and it was on a national scale, and it dealt with both the system and the market level here. And it was sustainable because there was a financial sustainability was built into the project. So here are some factors that we gleaned from all of the projects that we looked into that had been transformational, of what made them transformational, and you can see that, you know, one of the things is really the fact that you have to design from transformation from the beginning. You have to be ambitious, and you have to do it through either addressing markets or systems changes through policies, and preferably both of those. And you have to build in a financial sustainability into it. Just the last point here is that, you know, these can be achieved by projects of different size. So the GEF investment in Uruguay was $975,000, so less than $1 million. The second example I wanted to take pertains to innovation, because the GEF, like I said, you know, it's supposed to be innovative, and it's supposed to help countries to test and pilot approaches that can be scaled up and that can become transformational. And innovation, we defined, can be in many shapes. It can be technological innovation, but it can be a new financial model or a business model. And it can be policy and institutional innovation. So again, in this case, this was a more traditional portfolio evaluation, in the sense that we took a large number of projects and looked at whether they were innovative in the first place, and how innovation was associated with the results. And we came to the conclusion that innovation was associated with higher value added, and led to transformational change and sustainability and scaling up. You had to have stakeholder participation, you had to have private sector interest and economic incentives and so forth to be able to be innovative truly, and you had to have flexibility and adaptive management when you were doing these projects. But one of the things, of course, was the fact that governmental donors are often quite conservative, so they had a risk perception. They feared that these projects would be failing, so we had to overcome that. And for that, you needed to have a very strong monitoring and evaluation system that would catch all these factors, both positive and negatives. So we recommended to the GEF to articulate an acceptable level of risk, and to establish a specific window that would be financing these perhaps higher risk projects for innovation that could be tested and piloted and so on. And the GEF Governing Council took this example up And in the current 4-year replenishment period in the documentation, they have established a specific window for projects that can tolerate higher levels of risk. So these are a couple of examples of how I think evaluation in the GEF has really influenced policy making. So what are the factors in general? And I think these gel very well with what Jean-Sébastien has talked about. These are some of the common factors that drew influence in the GEF. So first of all, you have to be relevant. So you have to select an evaluation that comes at the right time to answer some questions that the policymakers and implementers and project proponents have in mind, so that it can be directed towards the future. And of course, you have to pay attention that you are doing a quality evaluation with credibility and so on. But also very important is that you engage the stakeholders throughout the process, that you have this communication there. Not only at the end, but when you do have it, but when you do the evaluation, you communicate with the various stakeholders about what you're up to, what are your questions, what are the data needs where they can help also. And then, of course, you'll have to have recommendations that are based on evidence. And that's a tricky part also there, because sometimes you come up with very high-level recommendations, and the stakeholders, the evaluand, are saying that, so what are we supposed to do with these? And then you go into more details, and they say that no, now you are going to be, now you are being too prescriptive. So you have to find a sweet spot in between. But the most important things, I think, here are the first and the last, in the sense that you select an evaluation that responds to a question, and you that is on people's minds, and then you deliver it in a timely manner, especially when there are decision points that can be made here. And we actually wrote a book based on the GEF evaluation and this and the experience, and this book is available for free of charge, open access downloading on Rutledge website. I can put the link into the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. All three talks were excellent. I want to share my screen and a few thoughts before we leave. Let's see here. What did I just do? What did I just do? Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes, Ed.
okay. My screen disappeared. Interesting. I don't know why. Anyway, let me know. No, that won't work. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Okay. There. Here we go. And I just want to mention our next webinar will be in November. And as I mentioned, artificial intelligence and the evaluation of energy programs and policies, guidance for the Asia Pacific region. I'll be talking, as well as Haider Khan and Laura Gagliardone, and I hope you can attend that. Second point I wanted to mention was that previous speakers talked about Yoda, Han Solo, Indiana Jones. I guess I would have to come up with Rocky Balboa, only because we seem to be in battles all the time, and it takes a while to become victorious in our evaluation challenges and conflicts. So that's my winner for today. We are sort of short on time, but I think when I was thinking about policymakers, I guess the big question is, when you go through this, and stakeholders, who are they, and when do you interact with them? And do you interact at the end or during the early stages? And what type of interaction do you have? So when you're developing an evaluation plan, do you invite them to get their reactions to that? And at the same time, when they're planning out a program, are you invited, or you being the evaluator, or evaluators being invited, so they can ask questions and see what kind of data is being collected and what kind of data should be collected? So I guess that's sort of my challenge for the evaluators these days. I don't know if any of you wanted to respond, Jared or Jean-Sébastien or Juha, based on your experience. Jean-Sébastien, it looks like you're about to say something before me. You got to cut me off. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you want to start. You have put your mic on, so I don't know if you want to. Otherwise, well, what I can tell is that for Europe it's a bit complex, because sometimes it's difficult to identify who will be the person actually in power of decision, who will make the decision.
Right.
Who is the contact of the evaluator for sure, but this person is not necessarily the person who will decide afterwards. They will just wrap up the report, take the main conclusions out of it. Sometimes they will rewrite the conclusion and transfer it to the next step where the decision process will happen. So it's on paper it's quite complicated how it happens, and there is some distance between the evaluators and the decision process, and you even don't know what happens. It's rare that you get a feedback afterwards about what has been done with the evaluation. It happens. Right. Sometimes it's better, but that's not always the case.
Okay.
May I continue?
Sure.
In the GF system, so there's different kinds of stakeholders, and in a way, so we would importantly engage the stakeholders when setting the evaluation agenda. At that point of time, we would consult with both the governing council, the management in the secretariat, and the agencies that were developing the project. So what are their information needs? What are their evaluative expectations, so to say? Then when you conduct the evaluation itself, so we'd engage more with the projects themselves on the ground, and to the extent possible with the people that they were supposed to be benefiting, and of course the governments in which these projects were taking place. And at the end, then coming back again to the higher level management, especially in the GF secretariat and so on. So we were an independent evaluation office, or they are an independent evaluation office. So my take on the independence would always be the fact that we conduct the evaluations independently, and the findings and the conclusions that come out of the evaluation are our conclusions and findings that are based on evidence. So these are non-negotiable. But when you develop the recommendations, we might not always be in the best position to say what exactly should be done. We'd have areas where recommendations are needed and where improvements are needed, but how to do that, there I would always want to be more participatory and involve the stakeholders.
Jared, you want a last comment, or you can pass?
I mean, yeah, I mean, just to wrap up, I think, well, in California, it's really the regulator or policy maker that leads a lot of the evaluation, so it's very embedded. Massachusetts is a little more separated, where there's kind of more like an advisory council that then works back with those policymakers. So I think it varies to some extent in different states, different jurisdictions. But I like Juha's last comment there, where the, you know, sort of the public comment process is usually where a lot of the recommendations get shaped and all stakeholders kind of weigh in. But you do have to hold firm in terms of, you know, the empirical evidence is what it is. So if the outcomes aren't great, you can't sort of go back and you know, sort of say, well, the methods weren't good because we don't like the result. Well, sometimes, you know, you've got to learn from it and take it with what it is. But how you're gonna operationalize that finding, I think it's most effective when there's more stakeholder input versus sort of you know, just coming up with what you think based on just an immediate reaction to some result.
Right. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for presenting. Nazir,
we have a question in the chat from Mohib. I don't know if someone would like to take it. Mohib, would you like to unmute yourself and quickly ask who it is for? Or maybe I can read out the question. So it's question is, given the size of the investment in some of these projects, is there some example of value for money evaluation or economic evaluation? So I don't know, maybe it's for Juha.
Yeah, very good question. And we actually started doing a couple of what we called specifically value for money evaluations. Not in the energy or energy sector, but in environment more broadly. We looked into GEF's investments in land degradation and biodiversity conservation, and we particularly looked into the value for money beyond the direct outcomes of these projects. So, for example, in the land degradation evaluation, we try to quantify the carbon benefits of these land degradation projects, which relate to, of course, to forest cover and land use changes and to improvement in land quality and so forth. And we used some internationally accepted financial returns for carbon and adjusted them to what happened on the ground using actually satellite data and looking at the land use change over the years. So that was quite interesting. I can again put maybe link into the chat on to these evaluations.
Great. Oh, Jean-Sébastien, your hand's up. Did you want to comment?
Yes, no, just to follow on that, that's also a trend we see in Europe, and that's connected to what I mentioned, I guess, with the increasing role of court of auditors that are playing role that is closer and closer to evaluation sometimes. And it is typically because, I mean, that was not the case before for most of the energy efficiency policies and programs, because they had a smaller budget. But now that we have policies or schemes that are several billion euros, or let's say several $billion in place, Of course, this type of institution, they look at that because it becomes significant in terms of use of public budget, and we have a lot of public constraints, public debts, concern, etc. But so it's good in a sense because you have more players, let's say more institutions, more different approaches looking at the policies, trying to assess them, making recommendations. But on the other hand, if you look only at value for money, you may lose part of the scope because you cannot monetize everything, and sometimes you may have very important policies that bring a lot of public good, let's say, but that cannot be captured through quantitative indicators, or at least monetary indicators.
All right. Nazir, I'll hand it over to you again.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Juha. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Jared. It was really interesting. Thanks to all the participants for staying through the webinar. As I said, we will be sharing the slides and as well as the recording through our website and as well as through email through all the registrants. Just follow our LinkedIn page and get to know about all the upcoming activities and events that we are planning. And it would be great if you could also share your feedbacks through the link I have shared in the chat. That's all from us. Thank you, everyone, and wish you a great weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.